This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
As a young man, his home had a beautiful beachfront view, but not much else. He was living under a pier on a South Alabama beach. Now, he's a New York Times best-selling author and one of the premier speakers in the nation. Andy Andrews on this edition of Conversations. Welcome to Conversations. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you for deciding to spend some time with us. Andy Andrews is our guest today, New York Times best-selling author. He's got a couple of new books out, a children's book entitled The Boy Who Changed the World, and also Andy Andrews, The Butterfly Effect, I should say, How Your Life Matters. Andy, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure for me to have you join us. I've watched you over the years, going back to when you were a comedian performing on the Nashville Network, and then, of course, you did the big PBS special. But before we get into talking about the new books, take me back how you went from being under a pier in Orange Beach, Alabama to on the New York Times best-selling list.
Right. Well, it's amazing that people sometimes think that was a quick jump. But to me, it didn't seem like a quick jump. It took years and years. And when I was 19, my parents died, and my mom died of cancer. My dad was killed in a car accident, and I made some bad choices and ended up literally sleeping under a pier and in and out of people's garages. Interestingly enough, these weren't horrible choices. They weren't tragic choices. Right. It was just little bitty bad choices one after another, but when you string them all together, this is where they lead, right? And so I met an old guy there eventually named Jones. We didn't call him Mr. Jones, we just called him Jones, and he was the first guy ever to tell me the truth about myself. He really kind of dug in and made me very introspective at that time, and he got me started reading. I was reading biographies at his request, and eventually read over 200 biographies of these happy, influential, financially secure people, trying to figure out what is it about them. Were they born this way? Is it something they did? And I found 7 things. I didn't even know what to call them at that point. I called them things, but these were the 7 things I started throwing in my life at that point to eventually yank myself out of that situation. And years later, they became the 7 decisions in the Traveler's Gift and the 7 decisions in the PBS special. And so they are, it's amazing to see now what those 7 things have become. But all that started under the pier. It was one of these worst times turning into a best time, because obviously I wouldn't have chosen that for anything in the world, and yet without that I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
What are the 7 things? Okay,
I'll tell you very quickly, but you got to understand these are not going to blow your mind. It's funny that when you tell people, they go, "Oh, that's it," but most people don't understand the intricacies involved in them, or the ability that they have when lashed together to create huge change in life. The first one is responsibility. The second one is seeking wisdom. Third is action, actually being a person of action. Number 4 is having a decided heart. Number 5, choosing to be happy. Number 6 is greeting each day with a forgiving spirit. Number 7 is persisting without exception.
I think it's interesting about the forgiveness, and I often wonder how many people stall their lives by getting wrapped around the axle because they dislike or they hate someone, either at work or in their family. How important is that really?
This is huge. It can even affect your money. It can affect your obviously your relationships, but it can affect your job performance and everything. And the reason is because we are different people when we're carrying a grudge. People can see it on our faces. People sense it in our spirits. And so it's one of those things when I say it can affect your money, people go, well, how is that possible? Well, one huge thing about our money is to become people that other people want to be around. When we're in sales, and whether we consider ourselves in sales or not, believe me, we're all in sales.
Yeah.
If you have kids, you're in sales.
That's right.
If you're married, you're in sales. And so
Really.
to become a person that other people want to be around is a key. And when we carry a grudge, whether that's a grudge against somebody else or a grudge against ourselves, it affects our spirit. It affects who we are and how we relate to other people. So it can affect your money. One of the things that I think people don't understand about forgiveness, and 30 years of research has told me this, that I can't find one book or one expert to tell me for one person to forgive another person that this person has to ask for it, deserve it, or even be aware that they are being forgiven. You know, forgiveness, it turns out, is a decision, not an emotion. We treat it like an emotion, which is why it drags us around like a dog on a leash. But when we decide to forgive, our emotions will eventually follow good decisions. And so it's important that we make this decision. Now sometimes, let me add this, sometimes I'll talk about this and people say, oh what, so they're just going to get away with it? No, because we can't misunderstand forgiveness with trust. You know, forgiveness is about us. Trust is about them. Forgiveness is about the past. Trust is about the future. When when somebody lies to us, do we forgive them? Sure. Do we continue to believe everything they say? No, not necessarily.
No. Of the 7, is there one that is, say, more important than the others?
You know, I think without each one, they can't be as powerful, but if there is one that you had to choose that wraps them all together, it is action. Number 3, I'm a person of action, because you can know the other 6, but if you don't do anything, if you don't do something, the other 6 don't really matter, right? And so I think doing something, that action is, I think, is the key to bringing our society back to a place we want it to be. I think that is the key to mending relationships. It's the key to so much that we have. It's the key to mending your family economically and in every other way.
A lot of people might say, well, I would take action, but I'm afraid it might be the wrong action. Are you better off doing something as opposed to just doing nothing?
Absolutely. And you know, we do nothing when we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when people don't know what to do, that's what they do. They do nothing. And this guy, Jones, you know, one of the first things he told me, and one of the most important things, this guy, he called himself a noticer. And Jones told me one time when I said, I don't know what to do. He said, I know you don't know what to do. He said, that's why you're doing nothing. Right. He said, I know you're working. I know you're trying to find other work, but you're spending 2 or 3 hours a day sitting under the pier, walking the beach, doing nothing. He said, if you had a TV, you'd be sitting in front of it watching it. He said, that's what most people do when they do nothing. He said, look, I know you can't do everything right now, but you can do something right now. So when you don't know what to do, you need to always do something. He said, you have forgotten the value that has been placed inside you. He said, you got to remember it, so let's start over. He said, can you read? Go read to somebody. Right. Can you mow grass? Go mow grass for somebody. He said, I'm not saying go ask somebody, if I mow your grass, will you give me $10? I'm saying you need to go out in your community, find weeds that need pulling, and pull them. Because then you will begin to establish a value in yourself that you didn't have before. And more importantly, other people will see you differently. They will establish a value on you. No longer, he said, will you be this little bum that bathes in the Holiday Inn swimming pool. Now people are going to look at you and they're going to go, what is it with this kid? Every time I see him, he's helping somebody. Right. What is it with this kid? Every time I see him, he's smiling. What is it with this kid? Every time I see him, he's fixing something. He's making things look better. He said, they will place a value on you that didn't exist before. He said, you will become to them a person of value. He said, what happens to people of value? They get opportunities, they get advice, they get help, they get job offers, and all because you did something when you didn't know what to do.
Just kind of priming the pump, so to speak. What was the first thing that you did? And I know you started reading the biographies and stuff, but what took you from that point into speaking and television and comedian?
You know, you almost said comedian in, didn't you?
Yeah.
Speaking and television and comedian in. You know, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I always wanted to be a speaker, but I knew, you know, who wants to hear what you got to say?
Right.
You know, when you're a young guy. And so being a comedian was the best way I knew to practice speaking and to get on stage and learn how to deal with people and to change their attitudes and to change their viewpoint. And so I did this for a number of years, and I got fairly good at it. You know, I toured with Joan Rivers and Kenny Rogers and Garth Brooks, and things went really well. But ultimately what I wanted to do was to speak. Well, when I was under the pier and literally roaming the beach over in Orange Beach and Gulf Shores, Alabama, there was a guy over there named Brent Burns, and Brent played. He was the big entertainer in town. You know, he played all the great clubs in town,
Right.
and Brent would let me stand up during his breaks and talk. Well, you know, most of the people at that time in South Alabama had never seen a comedian live, and of course when they were watching me they still weren't seeing one, but I used that time to practice and become better at it, and so that was a kind of an entree to getting out from under the pier, and I didn't have a place of my own until I was almost 29.
Wow.
When my wife and I were about to get married. I was about, let me rephrase that. I was about to ask her to marry me, and a friend said, "You know, Andy, you can't ask this girl to marry you. You don't own a place. You don't even have a place. You don't even rent a place. You're kind of still staying with people." And so I bought a condo for $65,000, and I had a place. And then I was able to ask her dad, "Can I marry your daughter?"
That's great. Well, what transitioned you over from being a comedian to more of the, and I don't really want to use the word motivational speaker because you're almost more of a teacher type.
Yeah, I'm not a
think.
motivational speaker.
Yeah.
Motivational speakers, I tell people, if what you want is for somebody to tell you to have a good attitude,
Right.
I'm not your guy, because
Right.
I kind of feel like your mother should have told you
Right,
that. you know?
right.
I'm more into proof than I am encouragement. I think encouragement's good. I just
Right.
think it's very short-lived. And so I feel like if I can prove a principle to you, if I can prove a process to you, then you can take it long after I'm gone. If I can prove something to you in one of my books, then you can use it on your own terms, and the guy hadn't got to be in the room. But when I was working as a comedian, I was touring with Kenny Rogers, and we were on the bus one night, and I was talking to him about the time under the pier, and Kenny was talking to me about living in a garage in Houston with 150 brothers and sisters or whatever it was.
Right.
And I was telling him about these 7 things, and he said, "You know, you need to start doing that in the show." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Start putting some of that stuff, those principles in your show." And I said, "Like be funny and then be serious?" He said, "Yeah, and be funny again." He said, "You're a talker, you transition, that's what you do." So so then I asked the big question. I said, "Do you want me to do it in your show?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so." So we were touring arenas, you know. It was me and Dolly Parton and Kenny, or me and the Oak Ridge Boys and Kenny. And I had 25 minutes, and I started throwing in 3 or 4 or 5 minutes of this stuff. And people started coming up to me and they go, "Oh, I loved you tonight. Now, your serious stuff was my favorite," which is not usually what a comedian wants to hear.
Right.
But then they started saying, "Hey, can you come into my company? I own this company, and could I get you?" And yeah, sure. And that really started that transition. But when I wrote The Traveler's Gift, this story about the family going through a tough time and the dad getting to travel through time, meeting with 7 historical figures. And each of these figures, Anne Frank and Harry Truman and Columbus and Lincoln at Gettysburg, they would give him a different decision that if he puts it in his life. When I wrote that book, things really kind of took off.
That's amazing. Take me back. I heard a story about you. The first book you wrote, what was it called?
Storms of Perfection.
And as I understand, it was a real challenge for you to get it published.
Yeah, it was really, I thought, a great idea. And the idea was that everybody hears about everybody's success, but nobody hears about what they went through to get there.
Right.
And so my idea was that I would talk to some of these people that I knew and talk to some people that I admired, and I would get them to write me a letter on their letterhead in their own words with their signature at the bottom, telling me about the worst rejection or worst challenge they faced before they became successful, when they were just like me. Right. And I thought, this is a great idea. Unfortunately, I couldn't get anybody to participate. I was into the 50s or 60s before I ever got the first one. Jack Hanna wrote me my first letter, the guy with the animals.
Yeah.
And wrote me my first letter. I ended up writing almost 400 or 500 letters before I got the 50 that were to be in the book. And I had some great letters, but it was, when you get turned down that much, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm writing a book about rejection, I'm getting taught a lesson about it. Right. And so then I couldn't get my own agency, who had a literary department. You know, I was with the William Morris Agency at that time, no longer with them, but they had a literary department, and they wouldn't represent their own client with this book. And so then I said, well, okay, I'll find my own publisher. I couldn't get a publisher. Then I couldn't get, I thought, well, I'll just publish them myself, you know. So I took out a second mortgage on my condo, and I got the money and so we published it. My manager and I, we published it ourselves, and they delivered 10,000 books, and they said, where are you going to put them? And I said, I guess in the condo. I said, you're not putting them in here because, you know, it'll collapse the place. I didn't realize how much 10,000 books weighed. Yeah. And so we started, you know, then I said, well, I got to get them into bookstores. I couldn't get them into bookstores. No bookstores would take them. No distributor would take them. And so I'm stuck with 10,000 books, you know, in a little mini storage. And so I started talking about them in Kenny's shows and started talking about these principles, and they started selling. Well, long story short is when I sold 100,000 copies of it, I went back to the literary department and the publishers, and they said, well, you know, it's already done now. Obviously, we were wrong, but the books have already sold. That's probably as many as you're ever going to sell. And so I went back, and after I sold 200,000 books, I came back to them again, and they said, gosh, what are the chances of us being wrong twice? But obviously, you have now sold all books. So after 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000, I just didn't even bother to go back to them. But the good thing, you know, I want people to take from this is there's always a way. Yeah. You know, there's always a way. Yeah. You're never lacking money. You're never lacking time. You're never lacking leadership. You're only lacking an idea. Yeah. Just an idea. And I wanted to create something that had value to other people, that made them feel like, hey, I'm not alone. You know, those books are out of print now. I see them occasionally on eBay or something like that. But even what looked like the worst, you know, it looked like the worst. Oh, you can't get a publisher. You can't get a distributor. Well, people say, what a horrible thing. Yeah, but you keep all the money.
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, the books sold for like $12.95, you know, and usually, like my books now that are in the bookstores, I make about $1.50 a book. You know, they sell for $20. I make like $1.50 a book. But those books, I was making like $10 a book, you know, and so
it was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah. And so I try to tell my boys, I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I try to tell my friends and my clients, the people I work with, you know, just look for an idea. Mm-hmm. You know, don't be discouraged or depressed to the point that it makes you stay where you are, because you're not lacking. You may feel like you lack money, but you're not lacking money. Ultimately, you're just lacking an idea.
You know what I'm taking from you, and I've interviewed a lot of successful people, and this always comes through with successful people, is passion. And you had the passion to get that out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, sometimes, listen, here's a secret a lot of people don't know. Sometimes you have to develop that passion a little bit artificially, you know, because sometimes people look at me and I'll talk to them about depression, or I'll talk to them about these kind of, and people say, well, you probably have never been depressed. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Listen, I have talked to the American Association of Depression while I was depressed, okay? And so, but I understand that if you want to have passion in your life, even when you're depressed, you can't act depressed, right? I mean, because you know what I feel like when I'm depressed. I feel like sitting down in front of the TV and eating a quart of ice cream and watching some mindless something. Right. But that is not a prescription for feeling better. Right. You know, I mean, you and I both know that there are people that when we hang around them, we feel better. Right. There's music that when we listen to it, we feel better. Yeah. There's books that when we read, there's places that we go, when we go there, but see, here's the big question. Can you make yourself do it? But that is the big success question anyway. Can you make yourself do something you don't necessarily want to do to get a result you would like to have? You know, that's the big question anyway. So can I make myself, even though I don't feel like going and being around these people, even though I don't feel like putting on that music, even though I don't feel like sitting down and writing 50 things I have to be grateful for, can I make myself do it even though I don't feel like it, to get to feeling like I do want to feel?
So how do you get to that point? You just gut it up and do it?
It's discipline, and you have to understand the proof in discipline. And now listen, I'm not talking about a clinical challenge. I'm not talking about something where somebody might need medicine.
Right.
I'm talking about the kind of thing where we wake up and we go, I went to bed and I felt okay, and I'm waking up this morning and what is that? I'm talking about that, because discipline in almost any area. I mean, people look at me, Jeff, and they think, wow, a New York Times best-selling author. What a wonderful thing to have a love for writing. Yeah. I don't have a love for writing. I don't even like to write. I like having written.
Right.
I like being through with it.
Yeah.
But I like having books. I like being an author. I like giving books away. I like making my living that way. But do I like to write? I mean, anytime I sit down in front of the computer, there's only 20 or 30 things I can think of I'd rather be doing.
Yeah.
Okay? And people say, but you're good at it. I wasn't even the best writer in my senior English class. Right. Any audience I speak for, I'll guarantee you there's 10 or 20 people who write better than I can. But can you make yourself sit down and do it?
Goes back to action.
Yeah,
Goes back to action. Speaking of writing, you have a new book out. It's entitled The Butterfly Effect, How Your Life Matters. What's it about?
This is proof. This is proof about how much you matter. Not encouragement. This is proof. This takes an actual story of little bitty things that were done hundreds of years ago that come out to create the world in which we live. It uses real people. George Washington Carver, uses Joshua Chamberlain, Norman Borlaug, a vice president of the United States that you never heard of. And this actually creates proof. I mean, I think of this as the ultimate gift to give somebody, because you can say, you matter, and I want you to understand how much you matter, because everything we do, every action we take or don't take matters just as much as See, the butterfly effect itself was a doctoral thesis written in 1963 by Edward Lorenz, and it was presented to the New York Academy of Sciences and laughed out of the place. The butterfly effect stated a butterfly could flap its wings on one side of the world and set molecules of air in motion that moved other molecules of air that then moved other molecules. Somewhere along the line it could mess with weather patterns on the other side of the world. It was crazy, but it was interesting. Right. And because it was so interesting, it hung around forever in comic books and bad movies, until finally, in the mid-90s, physics professors proved the butterfly effect was accurate and viable, and it worked every time. And not just with butterflies. It worked with any form of moving matter, including people. And so what I do is I take that effect and take a life and one little action 150 years ago that one guy made on a late summer afternoon, and take you right up to the point where you go, oh my gosh, I live like I live because of what this guy I never heard of did. And so it's a way to give to somebody the gift of how much they matter, how much they really do matter. And so the children's book, The Boy Who Changed the World, is the same thing in children's form. And I'm so excited about especially the children's book, because I think kids everywhere need to understand, everything you do matters. Every move you make, every action you take. Because, man, don't you feel like our lives would have been easier if we'd understood that from the beginning, how much our choices matter?
That's right. That's right. Andy, there's no secret that many people have been challenged given the current economic conditions that we're dealing with in this nation.
Right.
Probably got 4 minutes here, 3 to 4 minutes left in the program. Give me some key things that people should put into their lives as these challenges mount for them and across the nation, and particularly along the Gulf Coast, where you're from.
I've dealt with a lot of friends, and I deal with a lot of situations around the country with companies, with teams who are going through rough patches. And here's one thing that we as human beings really seriously need to understand, and that is, for everything that is reality, there is an equal reality that we can also choose. Mm-hmm. There is a reality about the oil spill that it's horrible, that we're scared, that we don't know what's going to happen. But I got to tell you, I cannot live in that reality because I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And this cannot be the summer that Mom and Dad lost it and got divorced because of the oil spill.
Right.
This cannot be the summer that Daddy did something to himself because of it, right? So I have to take my family and my mind in another reality, which says, because see, the only reason I live here is because of saltwater fishing and the beach. And I mean, that's because I write. I can live anywhere I want to.
Right.
Okay? But I've got to take my family and my mind in a different reality that says the golf courses are still fine, there's freshwater fishing, the Blackwater River's right over here. You know, there are other things to do other than that. Now people say, but my reality is I make my living this way. Okay, but there's another reality that says you're only lacking an idea. Yeah, I know you use your boat to fish. Now you're going to use your boat for environmental tours. Okay, yeah, I know that you can't sell this in your shop, so now we're going to sell that. I mean, I know shop owners that have Save the Gulf t-shirts, and they're making thousands of dollars on Save the Gulf t-shirts. It's an idea. You know, it is a mindset that we must get into, and what we must understand is that when we are in that reality of, it's awful, this is reality, it's awful, I'm scared, I don't know where my life's going, people are less likely to help us, they're less likely to hire us because we're not people other people want to be around. And people say, look, dude, that is just, I mean, that you're in a dream world. No, I am in a reality of my choosing. I'm helping people understand that there is a different reality that you can see, that you can choose. You're lacking an idea. Well, you and I both know we've seen one idea save millions of lives. We've seen one idea make billions of dollars.
Yep.
Why not you?
That's right. Andy Andrews, what a pleasure.
Buddy, thank you.
I'm
honored to have been here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. He's a New York Times best-selling author, Andy Andrews. He has a new children's book out. It's entitled The Boy Who Changed the World, and also the book for adults entitled The Butterfly Effect, How Your Life Matters. And of course, if you want to take a look at some of Andy's other books, you can do so. AndyAndrews.com has a wonderful website, and of course, we'll probably see him from time to time on PBS and around on other television venues, spreading a lot of good advice out there. We greatly appreciate you watching this edition of Conversations. And by the way, you can check us out on the web, WSRE.org/conversations. If you'd like to take a look at some of the past episodes, they're online. And we're also on Facebook. Just search Conversations with Jeff Weeks. We'd love to hear from you. Take very good care of yourself. Thank you so very much for watching. We'll see you soon.